fam, today I got for you fam a super detailed race recap video of my time racing recently the USATF Pacific Northwest Half Marathon Championships. If you haven't checked out that vlog, I'll link that video at the end of this video. Check it out, it's pretty spicy. Today, maybe some of you fam can relate, but I'm going to go over some detailed Strava data about the execution of the race, about how I felt, and talk about different training principles and why I executed the way I did, aka by heart rate. If you like this video, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's get to it. Alright, first, let's talk about how I felt leading into the race and what I did. This race for me was more so of a kind of like training run to see where I'm at. I'm still in the middle of a marathon build for the Wineglass Marathon, so there was no really true taper. The week before I ran 112 miles total with several workouts, and the week prior I believe around like 80 or 85, don't quote me on that, with still pretty big workouts on Wednesday and Friday with the race on Monday. So going into this, I figured if I can run this on tired legs and hit a certain pace, depending on how I feel, that would tell me that I'm pretty fatigue resistant and I could probably handle, hopefully, a 26.2 mile race at a steady pace or the pace that I want to hold. Now for this race, I did use heart rate as a guide. I have been watching a lot of Steven Scollion's videos on lactate threshold, and I have been kind of delving into double lactate threshold sessions. Maybe I'll do a video on that in the future. Comment down below if you would like to see that. But basically it follows the concept of the Norwegian training, where there's certain correlations of heart rate to lactate threshold 2, or the true start of your anaerobic threshold, low level end of the heart rate, and then there's also the higher end of the heart rate. I'll post a link in the description down below to where I got this data. It's right here actually, training philosophy. Here's a sample week of the Norwegian training. Basically, I tried to keep the first mile lower end threshold, or about 2.5 millimole equivalent heart rate, which is about 84.5% of your heart rate max, and work up to about 67 to 70, which is about 89.5% of your heart rate max. So that was the goal, to hold as much of the race, and that's supposedly equivalent to 3.5 millimole of blood lactate. They say that you can run for about an hour hovering around 4 millimole, but you have to take into consideration, depending on how you feel, which we'll talk about how I felt during this race in a sec, the weather, competition, wind is all going to affect how you body produces blood lactate. But heart rate is a good correlation to effort. So even if I wasn't feeling the greatest, if I still ran by heart rate, I would still achieve the same percentage of lactate threshold-ish, but I probably would be running at a slightly slower pace depending on how I feel, which is what happened in this race, which is what I will go over in a sec. Now, I have not done a lactate test where they prick your finger. I kind of want to get one of the lactate meters. So basically, where I got this ballpark value is by years of, probably since 2019, feel and lactate threshold heart rate by heart rate reserve. Google that, you can figure out kind of like where your lactate threshold zone is, the lower and upper end. And if you look at like the Jack Daniels pace charts and stuff like that, or different pace charts online, it does correlate pretty close to like what fitness you're in or what you have run. So there is some room for error, but at the same time, there's different ways of looking at it without getting all, into the data when it comes to lactate threshold. But that is something I definitely want to do in the future. Now, the night before, I did not sleep that well. I kept waking up in the middle of the night. My room had a window that was facing the street, and there was no blackout curtains, so the light was constantly hitting my eyes and waking me up several times in the middle of the night. Now, I know you're going to say that I should just focus on the race and don't worry about all this stuff, but given race morning and the lack of sleep that I had the night prior, while warming up with my heart rate strap, I noticed that for the same effort, my heart rate was like 10 beats higher. So my sympathetic response, flight or flight mode, right? If you've ever been stressed studying for a test or in school, work overload, body doesn't distinguish stressors. It's going to affect how your body responds, how your nervous system responds to the situation that you're in. So my heart rate variability was lower because my sympathetic nervous system activity was higher. So I knew that day, that morning, that I'm going to have probably a hard time trying to achieve what I want to achieve. But like I said prior, you can run by heart rate if the goal is to, run a good lactate threshold stimulus. Even if I end up running like, 6 or 7 seconds slower per mile than what I have done in workouts, which kind of is like what happened, then it's okay to be able to or run at that heart rate. Now, for the most part, the course was flat. There was a big hairpin turn at the end. By big, just meaning a really sharp hairpin turn. And there was one part with a bridge that kind of really slowed you down, one of those spiral bridges to cross the river and get on the other side. But for the most part, let's go over my splits and the pacing. Like I said in the vlog, I didn't have splits per se on my watch. All I had displayed was my heart rate on my watch. No splits. I did have auto split, and the auto split kind of was messed up a little bit because this trail was a covered trail, and it probably split on its own probably like 30, 40, 50 feet before the actual marker on the course itself. So take these with a grain of salt. Probably add maybe 4 seconds or so, 3 seconds, 5 seconds at some point. Here we go. This is the race analysis. We're going to go through miles, and we'll also talk about after, around the hour mark, you'll see that I kind of like really start to slow down in a sense. And I also did start to feel bonky towards the end. So if you're running for the most part more than 90 minutes, you probably should take in carbohydrate. But unless you're like around an hour flat for the half marathon, I would advise probably taking at least one gel. I probably should have taken one gel. I did take one gel at the start, but I still had the bonky feeling. And when your glycogen gets low, your heart rate at the same effort will actually get lower later in the race. So it's important to kind of fuel and make sure your glycogen storage is topped off before you get into the race, which is really important. Well, first mile, didn't feel too hot, like I said in the video. I wanted to get up to the start of LT2, the lower end of threshold, so I wanted to get to like maybe 159 or 84.5% for max. Which I did, but in this race, within the first 400 meters, there is a 400 meter mark. I looked down at my watch, I was in third, and I went through in about 72, 73, so I immediately backed off. My response, sympathetic response, my heart rate jumped up like quickly up to 164, and so I was already in the middle of my lactate threshold zone. And also, when it comes to warming up, it's important that you have to understand that you owe your body oxygen before you get into the effort, so you won't get something called a second wind, right? If you don't warm up, you just go straight into a hard effort, right? You hit that huff and puff, you hit that lactate spike right away. So before this, I did about a 2 minute, at like 6:10 pace, and maybe like a minute at like 5:40, and a couple strides to see if I can get that oxygen consumption up so that my heart rate can work less to get up to the point of lactate threshold. Because usually when you're fit, it could take upwards of, 1.5 to 2 miles for you to get into your lactate threshold zone. But for me, because of my sympathetic response for some reason during this race, I was within the first 400 meters. Didn't feel heavy arms or anything like that. Breathing was fine. I just kept it. I backed off right away, like I said. First mile, keep in mind, 3 to 5 seconds per mile or so, at least for the first mile. 456, so probably about 502. Immediately, I went up to about 169 beats per minute by heart rate, and I kind of just stayed there. There was another runner that caught up to me that, in a race situation, you kind of want to be by yourself. If you're with someone, it lowers perceived exertion. I believe his name was Brian. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments. But me and Brian caught up, and I stayed with Brian because I didn't want to be by myself. There were 2 runners completely out of my league, and then there was a third runner that caught up after. That was a 2:14 marathoner that was doing it as a workout. But I just stayed with Brian, and my heart rate hovered around 169 to 170. Second mile, 5:14, 5:12, 5:12 for mile 4, 5:13 for mile 5, 5:09 for mile 6, 5:13, and then I kind of slowed down. The halfway point obviously was at 6.55, and there's a little bit of a headwind. People started stringing out. I started ending up being by myself probably around mile 8 or 9, so it was very hard to kind of focus. I forgot how long half marathons are and how you have to stay focused the entire time so you don't lose your ground when it comes to racing. I did start to feel a little bonky around mile probably 8 to 10 or so, so I did feel like I was slowing down a bit, and there were parts. I know it says right here that like my heart rate stayed around 170. That's because I deliberately tried to speed up to get it up there, but it did start to drop back down to probably like 165, 166, probably because I was starting to get bonky and my glycogen stores were getting low. looking back at it, I probably would have taken a gel, probably around 6.5 miles. 5:09, 5:13 for 7, 5:19 for 8, 5:18 for 9, 5:18 for 10. At this point, I'm kind of just like going for a position. 5:26 at 11, 5:24 at 12, 5:16 at 13, the last 0.1 about 5:08 pace. So a little bit of a final sprint. The cool thing about this, I've noticed, I've been trying to look a lot more into data when it comes to like performance and stuff, and I'll compare this to my last half marathon I did, which I have right here, over almost a year ago, which was Rock and Roll San Jose. And I went out way harder in Rock and Roll, but like my cadence was a lot slower the second half of that race. But for this, my cadence pretty much stayed around 180, above 180, which tells me that I'm very fatigue resistant. I'm able to keep my lower leg stiffness there, because as lower leg stiffness decreases, when you get tired and running, you're going to overstride and your cadence is going to go down, right? So that's a sign of working harder. So besides that, from a fatigue standpoint, I think it was executed pretty well. For the effort of how I felt for the day and by heart rate, I also think it was executed pretty well. Now, the last race that I ran, the last half marathon, I ran 1:08:55, and that was about 6 weeks out from CIM last year. I ran 1:09:08 for this half marathon, and this is about a month out from Wineglass. So looking at the two, comparing the two, Rock and Roll had a lot of turns, weren't really any hills. This one was pretty flat for the most part, a little bit ahead on the way back. I do think that even though the time was slightly slower, I'm a lot more proud with the execution and how my body handled the fatigue resistance given the not true taper, the 112-mile week prior, and that was the circumstance, of course. Let's look at the pace distribution. A lot of threshold, a good chunk at threshold. I know it says that my pace zone calculations are no longer current. Update. This is based off my PR of 31:06. I ran on a track 10K back in 2019. I just haven't had a lot of opportunities to race to like see if I can run faster than that or run other things and also feel good and have the stars align, because I've been hurt for the first 6 months of this year, just getting back into it, but I'm probably in the best shape of my life right now. The relative effort for this, the cool thing about wearing a heart rate monitor is that it can take that information and tell you how large of a stimulus compared to prior efforts you've done. So this was probably the highest overreaching week I've had of training because of this half marathon. And by heart rate, as you can see, zone 4 threshold, 166 to 181. You may need to find out your max heart rate. You may have to go to a lab. You probably won't really hit your max heart rate. There's a couple things online you could probably find in Let's Run on like how to calculate your max heart rate. You can use like the Carovian method, the 220 minus your age, ballpark it. So I put mine around 187 because I'm 33 to 190. My watch has caught me at 190 apparently, so I'm probably in that ballpark. All right, so since I felt crappy, another cool thing about Strava is that they have the freshness and fitness thing here. And for some reason, right here, if you can see right here, this show that right the day before, whether it be tired or like it picks up on like how sloppy my form is. Maybe I didn't time the super compensation right leading up into it. So my form here, like the day before or so, like it was pretty low. Where it picked up, I can't tell if it picked up at the race that it sucked and that my fatigue was actually really high for some reason the day of, and that could be due to the autonomic nervous system not working properly because of the lack of sleep and the stress and the nervousness of racing. But for some reason during race day, my form dropped a lot and my fatigue increased. And then right here we have Rock and Roll San Jose. Notice how I went out like a bat out of hell. I did not wear a heart rate strap for Rock and Roll San Jose, just by watch, which is not accurate, by the way. But as you can see here, I was in the 5.0s, upper 450s. I was proud at the time. I thought I was going to have a massive PR by the first half of this race, but like I just fatigued a ton. I think this was before I paid for the subscription service, so for some reason it doesn't have Cadence, but I know for a fact that my Cadence dropped, which means I fatigued a pretty good amount. And that is the race recap. Comment down below if you got any questions. Comment down below if you can relate in any way when it comes to cadence or heart rate and effort. If you like this video, watch this one next. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell for when I post my next video. Love you, fam. Catch you guys next time. Peace.